You're good. Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Jovicic from LookUpStrata. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're looking at covering some New South Wales questions, and we've got Rod Smith here from the Strata Collective. So thanks very much for joining us, Rod.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was about to say good morning, but it's actually good afternoon. So.
It's still good morning over here in WA. Okay, so I'll just give you a rundown of Rod. So Rod is from the Strata Collective. The Strata Collective has been established to achieve a simple yet powerful vision to bring together the best management team combined with leading systems so that they can save their owners time and money. They build close, long-term relationships that weather the storms of strata life and come up on the top. Rod's career commenced in corporate finance and taxation, working with prestigious firms such as PwC before moving into the property industry. Specialising in the management of prestigious and complex strata schemes, community associations and building management committees. Rod brings a high level of technical experience to his portfolio. Rod holds an accounting finance degree from University of New South Wales and is a level 3 accredited strata manager in New South Wales. He participates on both the SCA New South Wales Education Subcommittee and the Urban Development Industry of Australia Strata Subcommittee. And just to give you an idea of how long Rod's been working with us, he's been answering questions on the LookUpStrata site since 2017. And we have around about 30 articles that he's provided information on. So thanks very much for that as well, Rod.
My pleasure. It's always fun, Nikki. I love the questions that you get there. They make me think, and you've got a good viewership and following that really cares and thinks about their stratas, which is awesome.
It is fantastic, isn't it? Thanks so much, Rod. And we're always surprised. People often ask, do we make up the questions? And we certainly do not make up the questions. We don't need to. We have so many questions submitted to us. So that's fabulous. Thank you very much. And I'll just quickly cover, this is a bit of housekeeping, but just as a disclaimer, before we begin, we'd like to remind everyone that the information provided should not be taken as legal advice. And in all instances, you should seek independent legal advice before acting on this information. Okay, so we've got some questions coming in, I believe, as well now on the Facebook live session, but we also had some questions submitted to us. Sorry, I've just got a little technical difficulty here with bringing up the screen. Okay, so we've got a question that was submitted to us, which I think is a really great question. So it's owners undertaking repairs to common property, Rod. And we had the question submitted from Jen, and Jen says, we live in a small townhouse style complex of 5 units where each owner has a footprint on the ground and a roof above. Recently, one of our owners was up on the roof. Apparently, he and one of the other owners had experienced some leaks. He had been to Bunnings and was repairing the roof himself. The building is 3 levels high. When I tried to explain that I'm uncomfortable with unlicensed people doing repairs, he dismissed me and said he wasn't repairing my unit's roof and it would save us all money. I was accused of being over bureaucratic and that because he was being careful, there was no risk of an accident. I tried to explain to him that it isn't his roof to mend and that he is not insured for any accident or the owner's corporation for poor workmanship. I'm the chair. Because there are only 5 owners, it makes it difficult for me because I also need to maintain good relationships with my neighbours who already dismiss strata regulations as nitpicking. What is the law on this and any suggestions on how best to handle it? And I think it's a fairly complicated question, Rod, so I'll pass over to you.
So I'm going to go down a train, and if I'm off track, apologies. But my first question is, do you have a strata manager? Because your comments are spot on, but as in a small block of 5, I don't think it should be you, Jen, that is firing the bullets. I think it should be the strata manager that's having the awkward but necessary conversation with the well-intentioned person who's climbing up a roof. So I spoke to one of my builders about heights, working at heights, what the minimum height is for a ladder before you need a cherry picker or a scaffold or something like that. And he said to me that if the ladder's long enough, you can use it based on what he researched. However, my research from Safe Work is that 2 meters is about the right height. My point is this, that it can be quite I guess it changes a lot from safe work, and these sort of works require a safe work method statement. You also need someone that's experienced with working on roofs. So it is very risky. I'll use a live example, and it's a sad example at one of my buildings that was doing an external paint job. So there was a man who was given ground duties on the painting team to do work, and he was up a ladder. He had undisclosed diabetes to his employer. He was up a ladder he wasn't meant to be. He fell off and he had an injury and he died. Now that's always stuck with me. It's so sad. He had a family. It was very tragic. The employer still got a fine of $150,000 from work cover because someone died on their site. So that's a real example, and I lived through that. So it's terrible. So someone that's not a skilled trade, haven't tried, well-intentioned, it just shouldn't happen with complex work such as going onto a roof. So whenever people think of their strata lot as their home, which is a beautiful thing. However, common property, you've got the responsibility to the other owners. So what I strongly suggest is employ a licensed insured trade who's experienced with working on roofs to fix your roof, even if it costs a few $100s, because the risk is just absolutely massive should there be an accident. So I know I spoke the long way around. It's just such a risky area. So owners doing bits and pieces. I think I mentioned to you before, Nikki, only last week, one of my clients, the building's called Radius, and the R dropped off the building. So they said to me, oh, Rod, I'm going to go and buy another R and put it back on and you can reimburse us. Now, that is an extremely low risk job. Just whacking an R on a wall. So that sort of thing. Some strata managers say, no, we take a more realistic view on that, but high risk work such as working on a roof is just too risky, so stay clear. If you've got a strata manager, they should be having the awkward but necessary conversation. If you don't, I would just, I wouldn't do it alone. I'd perhaps do it with the rest of the committee and just say, look, I want to talk about this. I really am concerned, and handle it that way. So it's not just you versus him.
Okay, that's great. And one of the other things I think that I was highlighted to when I read the question is the fact that he mentions that he's working on his own unit's roof. And I know you did mention that quickly there, but would you just like to cover that a little bit too, right? Is it his roof that he's working on, or?
No, it's not. You're spot on, Nikki. It's common property. So everyone's entitled to, everyone is required to pay for the roof under the strata schemes management because it's common property. So it comes through the strata schemes owners corporations funds. So it's not his roof, it's everyone's roof. That being said, it's required to be fixed. Just get a professional.
Okay, that's great. And also the other thing that sort of piqued my interest was the fact that the person who wrote in is the chair in the building. It's a small scheme, but they're also a neighbour in the building. So obviously they're having a challenge with both of those hats. And so do you have any advice for how to be the chair and run a scheme, but also be a neighbour and have a good association with your neighbours in the building?
I think just having an honest and friendly conversation. If you go in combative, these are obviously can-do people that want to fix things, that want to be helpful. However, the risk is too high, so I would just do it. The first step would be, if you've got a strata manager, the strata manager should be the one that has the conversation. If not, I would just have an open, honest conversation about it and say that we need to protect everyone's, and we need to protect our building, our insurance, and our safety obligations. So we can't have that happening. I'm just too concerned, and rightly so.
Excellent. That's some really great advice. Thanks, Rod. Okay, we've had another one that was submitted to it as well, so we might actually cover that one, and it was why are strata fees so high? And this is something that we get lots of questions about. So it's a lady, Maureen, wrote in and said, I've been a homeowner before, but I'm thinking of buying a unit for the very first time in my life. I'm puzzled by strata fees. Some of the new 2-bedroom units are selling for $400,000 each, but the strata fees are over $1,000 per quarter. I can't understand why they're charging so much when there's no elevator, gymnasium, swimming pool, or children's playground. In my experience, a new building usually has no problems until it's around 12 to 20 years old. Can you please explain why the hefty charge for strata fees?
Yeah, so in new buildings, the average for a 2-bedder in terms of levies around Sydney, and I had discussed this with a property manager who manages over 20,000 properties in their business. It's around $820 to $850 a quarter.
Okay, that's great. That's really good information. Thank you.
Yes, right. So then you can work backwards from there. If it's less, great. If it's more, you need to understand why. And there's valid reasons in almost all cases. You need to understand what you're buying, and you may need to look at not just one apartment, but a variety of apartments that fits your requirements. For 2-bedroom newer style apartments, the days of $500 a quarter levies, they are pretty much over. If you're buying in a brand new apartment and the agent says, oh, it's got lifts, a pool, a gym, and it's only $500 a quarter for the levies, something is awry, something is amiss. So you need to do your own homework on similar comparable buildings and what's covered. So behind every number is a budget and an explanation, even on a new building. So the strata manager will have put together a draft budget, but I'll give you some high level numbers about how we budget for brand new buildings. So for electricity, it's usually $300 to $400 a lot per annum, but it's less if it's got LEDs. For water, it's similar, $300 to $400 per lot per annum, but it's about half of that if it's individually water metered. Lifts are about $6,000 per lift if it's a low rise, but it can go up to 10 to 12 if it's a high rise city building, and we do manage high rise city buildings in our business. And fires, usually for a block of 50, it's usually around $5,000 a quarter. So you start pairing some of these numbers back, and then you can start to see where things are awry. So when we take on a building, we usually do a bit of a sensibility check around what they're paying and why, to see if anything looks amiss, and advising. But my advice to that person who's looking at buying an apartment, look at a few, work out what you can afford. If the apartment's cheaper than other comparatives because the levies are higher, that happens in property. If your running costs are higher, often that will impact the sales price because that gets reflected up front. But with a brand new building, you should be able to set it up in a way that's quite cost effective, so that everyone gets a good result. So $1,000 a quarter for a $400,000 apartment, that might not be achievable for that owner, but they'll need to have a look at that. But have a look at a few apartments and look at the references and the reputations of the developer and the builder as well, just to make sure you're buying a good product.
Excellent. And the other thing that was mentioned in there, in my experience, a new building usually has no problems until it's around 12 to 20 years old. Now, I think just around that, with the defects that we've seen happening in buildings, especially in New South Wales. And then the other thing is, even if it does take 12 to 20 years, people still need to be putting money aside for those things that will crop up down the track, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got legal requirements, the Capital Works Fund. So you've got two funds in Strata. You've got the Administrative Fund and the Capital Works Fund. So your Administrative Fund is the things that I just discussed, which are the day-to-day things, your water, your electricity, your cleaning, your gas, all those things that happen regularly month by month. And the maintenance contract, lift if you've got one, pumps, garage door, those sort of things. So all those contracts are Administrative Fund, the day-to-day. However, you've got a Capital Works Fund, which is essentially like your savings account. So you're saving up today for repairs that will come forward, they'll come up in the future years. So things like painting should be done every 7 to 10 years, depending on the quality of the original paint job. So you need, and that's usually the biggest ticket item for most strata buildings. And that can range into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. So you need to be chipping away each year. And the Act in Strata in New South Wales now says you have to have a plan for 10 years. You also have to review that plan every 5. So you need to work out what expenditure is coming up. 98% of the buildings that I'm involved with have someone independent and expert in this area. It's a trade, much like the same as electrician or a strata manager. There's people that do these plans, the Capital Works Fund plans, and they do a lot of them, and they're very good at it. And it gives you the baseline on what your strata should be expecting to spend over the next 10 to 15 years.
Excellent. And if you do happen to buy a building and the levies are really low, what kickback can you expect from something like that, Rob? What would happen down the track if you do actually end up doing that?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I just walked out of a budget meeting with one of our buildings that's just about to spend $2.1 million on their facade. So they have had to increase their levies more than double. So their levies have been up around the $4,000 to $5,000 per quarter mark for the last 3 years. They did a lift upgrade, they did a facade. So that was due to problems in those first 10 to 15 years, not raising enough money. And that was, that's now come back to haunt them now. But good news is we've got enough money, which is a beautiful thing to do all the things that we need to do. But you are likely to have problems in years 10 to 20 because lifts have a 20 to 25 year life before they need to have a major renovation. And most of those major lift renovations are in the order of $250,000 to $375,000 per lift. So if you've got 5 lifts and you've got $300,000 in the bank at year 20, it's going to be a difficult conversation at the AGM. So, yeah.
Okay, good advice. Okay, so we'll move on to another question that we had that came in. What to do when committees won't spend on necessary maintenance? So it sort of comes off the back of what we were just talking about a little bit. And this was quite a complicated question that came in, and I've kind of summarised it down a little bit because it was quite detailed. But the general gist of it was, our committee is aware of quite a few items which require urgent attention in our building. The situation's so bad, it's a safety hazard. A work health and safety audit was finally done. It was 6 years since the last audit. The audit highlighted a known trip hazard. It states the possible danger is on many floors in the building and recommends it must be repaired or replaced in the short term. Residents have tripped on this hazard. We have elderly people living in the building, and there are other major repairs that are also required. The committee will not act despite the fact that we have a very, very large sum of money in our fund.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about the why first and what's going on in that building, because I've seen that before in buildings. We took over a building 2 years ago that had $1 million in their fund. It's a high profile building, and they were able to raise the funds, but they just weren't spending it. And that comes around governance and decision making. So what that often means, as an outsider looking in without being personal or negative towards anyone, is that the people who are on the Strata committee for some reason aren't able to spend that money because they haven't been able to either get organised or turn their attention and hearts towards, let's make best use of this money, let's improve our building. So my first comment is that the Strata committee would need to take a good look at the way they're doing their business, because their business, the way they're doing their business is probably problematic, and they need to put some more attention on that. So that's the awkward but necessary conversation for that building. In terms of strategically for that building, the first thing I would do would be write to the Strata manager to ask them to attend to this problem. And it doesn't have to be a thesis, just a straightforward email. Wish to write and formally put in a request to repair this item on common property. It's on these levels. Can you please arrange for this to take place? Please raise this from the committee, and I'll get a formal reply to that. The next thing I would do is I would personally get a couple of quotes to do the repairs, and if they said no, that is, I would get a couple of quotes for the repairs and put a motion on the next AGM agenda. So any owner can put a motion on the AGM agenda, and the motion I'd put would be to accept one of the two quotes. If that then gets voted down, I would then be applying to Fair Trading New South Wales for an application to mediation, which now costs nothing, with the history on it. It doesn't need to be, 100 pages, just the work health and safety report, the quotes, the AGM minutes, the AGM agenda, and what was discussed and what you want to achieve, which is get this item fixed. I would be surprised if that wasn't successful.
Okay, and what sort of liability are the building opening themselves up to by not getting this work done?
Yeah, look, you have insurance, and I hate it when I hear buildings say, "Oh, we've got public insurance, public liability insurance. Don't worry about it." It's like, no, actually, how about stepping back? And we do not want anyone to get hurt in our buildings. We want to look after our tenants and our visitors and our tradespeople. So you do have insurance, but there is always liability in strata buildings, and in litigation, the net goes out. Strata manager get called in, the committee gets called in, the building gets called in, and the last thing you want to go through is a litigation because someone's broken a bone or really hurt themselves and is now impaired and having to sleep at night with that. So anything safety is just so important, Nikki. You need to jump.
And like you say, it's not just about the liability insurance, isn't it? It's the people that are actually living in the building.
Absolutely. We need to look after people, and the people in our building is just so important. So yep, I would just, if it's a safety hazard that's been picked up 6 years ago, that's a problem. We should be addressing it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Now we have a few more questions that were submitted to us, but we've had a few that have come in also in the discussion on the side. So I might just pull a couple of those out if that's okay. This one here from Tony Smith. How long after the building is built are we covered for any defects? We have banging noises which have been reported since day one and no one can find out what it is. How long are we covered if anything happens to the building? The builder's happy to fix, but no one knows what it is. We've paid a lot of money on specialists to come and see our problem, but still no answers.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so banging noises in my experience is usually a thing called water hammer. A water hammer happens when the pipes in the building, there's pressure and they bash against each other. That's normally that, or it's sometimes the lift as well. But I'd say it's building, it's water hammer. Normally, we had this on one of our city buildings where we had a hydraulic engineer come and work out what needs to be done. I've also had on smaller buildings that didn't get a hydraulic engineer. They turned down the water pressure on the pumps as well as the hot water system, so the water wasn't flying up and causing that bang. So there's sometimes a few things you can do about that. So the easiest way is to get your local plumber or your pump technician to have a look at it and see if there's anything that they can see. If not, you can get a hydraulic report. But Tony, to answer your question, which is a good one, I think you need to work out what the problem is before you can work out who's responsible. It's awesome that the builder wants to come back, but I think you'll probably need to do them a favor and try and work with them, or maybe even their original hydraulic engineer, and work out what's causing the problems. But it sounds like the builder's willing to come back. I would be looking at how to fix it and solutions around that, and then having the conversations.
Okay, excellent. That's great. And then another one that came in during our chat, and I think this one was submitted as well, and I have it in my list to go through, but it's from Kerry. Hi there, I emailed but not sure you received my question. How easy is it to get comparison quotes from other strata agencies? What questions should you ask? What information do you need to provide? How long should it take to get the information back?
Yeah, so normally what happens is I get a call out of the blue from someone and says, "Hey Rob, we're looking to get 3 quotes for strata. Can you help?" And my answer usually is, yeah, let's discuss your strata. So I get the bag of minced meat and I start putting the cow back together. So the first thing is, do you have a strata manager at the moment? How, are you happy with them, or you're not, or you're just testing the market? Is there anything specific that you want to address? So what I would do to answer that question, Kerry, is work out why you're seeking quotes for strata managers. What's the problem? Have you spoken to your strata manager about what the problem is, as in the owner of the business or the general manager, and tried to resolve that thing? Maybe it's a clash with the strata manager individually on your portfolio. Maybe they're someone that's experienced but slow, or maybe they're fast but not experienced enough. Or try and work out what that problem is and see if you can fix it. The next, if you want to still proceed with getting quotes, if it's past that point, I would sit down with the committee and work out what you're looking to achieve, and just having some criteria in your own documents around how you would think you could improve your strata service. And typically, in my experience, it's been speed of reply. That's normally the reason people come across to join the Strata Collective, is because we reply to people in 24 hours, and not everyone's able to achieve that because of their resourcing or their experiences or whatever. So normally that would be the key thing, work out what you're wanting to achieve. But some good questions. I wrote down some questions for you. I think this is going to be recorded, so maybe you could go back and ask and just go through this. Do you want a large company or a small company? Because there's pros and cons for that. We're a smaller company, so the pro is you get to, I'm actively involved in every aspect of our business, but the larger companies have strengths as well. What response times are you waiting on? 24, 48, a week? You don't mind as long as it's, as long as you get the quality there. Experience, what experience are you looking from the strata manager as well, who's allocated to you? Because if you say we're a small scheme, but we need a minimum of 5 years experience as a strata manager, obviously that resource would be paid more. So you may have to pay more if that's part of it. So you need to weigh that up, whether cost is a major factor. Is cost the main thing that you're driving at? Do you want to go cheaper? In which case you may be able to talk to your existing company about that, maybe having a cheaper resource, because in a strata business, we don't have machines or anything exciting. It's the people. So that's 85% of the cost in our business. So that's something to consider. What's the term of the agreement? Typically the strata agreements are 2 years. You can have a maximum of 3. Sometimes they go year to year, but it's a bit painful for everyone if it's year to year. So 2 years might be what you're wanting to achieve. What's their cost structure? Is it base plus disbursements? Are the disbursements fixed or variable? And what do you want? Because you could ask for a fixed price disbursements agreement. That's often, a lot of companies will do that as well. And I would also, most importantly, is seek references from similar buildings. So strata managers have strengths and weaknesses, and you want someone that's doing a good job on a similar building to yours and has runs on the board. So is that enough, Nikki?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic list. That's an excellent list. I'm sure people will come back in and write all of those down if they listen to the recording. And I think one of the other things that I had heard is staff turnover as well. I have heard people complain about the fact that the strata manager just changes all of the time and there's no continuity there with or consistency there. So is that something else that you've found, Rod?
Yeah, it's, you know what, it's interesting. Staff turnover in strata is often a thing that that owners complain about, and I absolutely understand why, because strata manager companies are traditionally poor at doing handovers between managers, and a lot of the intellectual property is held up here rather than in their specific systems. Now we have ways that we deal with that and try and retaining that IP across our business, but others would as well. We, as the owners of strata management businesses, along with our owners corporations, we're in partnership to keep the strata managers happy, we need to be making sure that we treat strata managers with respect, both in terms of the way we communicate with them and expectations versus what is achievable. We need to have grace both as employers as well as owners corporations that things are going to go wrong in these buildings, that it's not going to be perfect. And I say to all of our owners corporations that are joining the Strata Collective, we go for a higher distinction in Strata, same as uni. 85% of the time is what we shoot for, because things go wrong in these buildings. The lifts go out at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night. Or one of my buildings on Oxford Street, the lift broke down on Mardi Gras. Like, this stuff happens. It's really annoying. So we need to walk this journey together and build upon a foundation. If buildings are constantly driving down price of their strata managers, it actually impacts out the ability for strata companies to do a really good job. So that's why I always look at cost as what the cost needs to be for our business for us to be able to do a really good job. But I want to give my staff an awesome future as well, so that they can be paid well, that they're not overworked, they're not stressed to the max and not sleeping and not taking holidays and all those sort of things. So it's part of the massive strata crockpot about how do we partner with an organization that has the same, and a strata scheme partnering with us that has similar values to us, so that we can go on this journey together and have some fun and get some awesome results. So it's part of that communication relationship.
Because it can be quite a stressful role, can't it?
It's massively stressful. It's a massively stressful job. I've been in a portfolio for 17 years and I love it. I love being a strata manager, as you know, but it's difficult. There's sleepless nights. There's things going wrong in these buildings. So we need to work together as a team to get the results and also just to keep moving forward. So, yeah.
Okay, that's a fantastic list of questions. Thanks for that, Rod. Okay, so another one, and Kerry said thank you too. She said thank you, that's excellent. So it's great to get feedback back. So thank you, Kerry. Okay, so another one that we came in, which came in this morning on our Facebook page, but I think this is a really great question, and it is something that you've commented on, and we've had a question come in on the site quite a while ago, but it does come up quite a bit. So Frida asked, in a block of 4 apartments, we have 2 owner occupiers and 2 investors with a 25% lot share each. One owner occupier decided to place outdoor furniture in the garden next to her side door. The other 2 owners say that it's okay by them. I have objected to this for many reasons, so I'd like to know, is it legal and is it a majority rules here?
Yeah, strata is a majority, but I think it should be formally approved. Unfortunately, this is common. People, even my mum lives in a strata. She's just got off the committee after 20 years. And across from her neighbour keeps all their shoes in their corridor. And I said, Mum, why don't you complain about this? This is terrible. And she said, oh, don't worry about it, Rod. I don't care. You know, it's common in strata. So I think in terms of, if you're going to have an informal agreement, someone should write to the strata and seek permission to keep, a chair on, on a time-to-time basis. And the strata should say, yep, that's okay, but the conditions are attached. There are requirements for access. I think it's 1.5 metres. I'd need to look it up so that for disabled wheelchairs and those sort of things to be able to get into and out of entry and exits, but I would suggest this is maybe a fight you're going to lose because the other people don't mind too much about it. And I will give the caution with a block of 4. So blocks of 2 and 4, strata managers are always a bit nervous about quoting on, because they can get upstairs versus downstairs or east side versus west side, and that can get really messy and politically. You wouldn't think it, Nikki, but and I know I'm being honest, but you need to really be careful about what you're going to be majoring in for the sake of your community. And if the owners are okay with this, you may need to concede on that one, but it should really, and the strata manager should say, look, let's put this to a meeting. You can't just dump stuff on common property and have it formally approved.
Okay, because it's always important to have like the decision-making process documented, isn't it? Because we've had another question come in about there was another small building and they'd come to an arrangement on where the cars were to be parked on common property, and it was fine because everyone in the building agreed to it, but then somebody moved out and a new person moved in and there was no documentation as to why the decision was made or how the decision was made. So
yeah, I saw one of the questions as well about on that exact thing about parking, which is someone want to enclose their car space.
yes.
I've seen buildings, because cars are getting bigger. If you look at Victoria Road in Sydney, the lanes are really narrow because it's when, you know, whenever it was originally designed, the cars were narrower. So the reason that you can't often enclose these car spaces is there's minimum widths for car spaces. So if someone's got like a Land Cruiser or something, they can't get the doors open, you know. So yeah, so you've got to be really, really careful with that sort of thing, with parking and what's allowed and what's not. Informal arrangements such as them are okay once everyone's happy, but as soon as something changes, then you can often run into problems. So you're better off just keeping it as white as snow and having either a bylaw drafted if you want to formalise, or a resolution at a meeting that on a time-to-time basis this is what's going to happen, because otherwise it just ends up in the wash 30 years down the track. You know, I've retired, my son's running the business or whatever, and no one knows. So
No, it's all lost, isn't it? Okay, and then with that one as well, I mean, you mentioned about access and for getting bits and pieces through, but there's also fire regulations for access too in those common areas, isn't there?
Absolutely, yes. So anything that's going to change the doors, locks on common property, we normally get checked out by the fire contractor. I'll give you an example. One of our blocks only last week, they've had problems with their lift overheating, and the lift company said, look, get an air conditioning or a vent installed in that room and just chop a vent in the door. So the first thing I did, I saw the problems coming through. I emailed the fire contractor and saying, this is what we've been advised. He's like, you touch that door, Rod, you are impacting the fire safety on this building. I was like, right, okay. So now we need to go back to the drawing board around how can we fix the issue without creating problems for the fire safety, because safety in a building is just so important. It's everything, and it can't be something that's glossed over. So.
It's just so complicated, isn't it? So many things to consider.
You need to think it through and think about what are all the issues? What are the issues that I haven't thought about? Like fire safety, access. What if someone wants to move into this building that's disabled? How are they going to get in? There's a chair on common property. You know, those sort of things that they do come up all the time.
And that would come back to the expertise of the strata manager and the experience of the strata manager as well, I'd imagine, seeing things like that happen in other buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. Every day's a new day. Absolutely.
Okay, so another live question we've had come in. How does an owner fix a problem regarding NCAT orders against them, which was filed by a lawyer and no owners were advised, and the strata committee has no minutes of any proceedings? I don't know, is there enough information there for you to offer a reply to that one?
That's a tricky one.
Or...
So I assume that an NCAT order was made and no one knew about it. No one showed up except for the lawyer representing the Owners Corporation. Now we're stuck with this order. I think you might need to speak to Fair Trading or a lawyer about what the next steps are on that, because it's quite a specific one. And I'm not going to try and guess at the context around that. Sorry, I can't help with that, Nikki.
Okay, that's fine. What else have we got? We've got a comment from Pete Burney, who works solutions and engineering, about the fire access. I'd imagine shoes and items that are not common property stored in paths of travel would be considered a hazard when undertaking a safety audit. So yeah, that's something but thanks very much for the input on that, Peter.
Yeah, totally, Pete. I've seen them picked up time and time again. And then we have to fight the good fight and have the conversations with the people, which is prams, shoes, even doormats, raised doormats are a problem. I think it's the best policy is just not putting your items on common property, especially in foyers, because if you come home late at night or whatever it is, it can cause problems. So, yeah.
Excellent. What else do we have here? What obligations do strata managing agents have to ensure committees abide by the legislation? For example, what would you do about a committee that never has formal meetings, but instead meets regularly in private and continues to make decisions and spend money that owners know nothing about?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you need to do is look at the strata or work out what the strata manager's contract says. So a lot of strata managers, they actually have the ability to just go ahead and do works under a full delegation. So, however, if the strata manager's only got delegations up to $5,000 or $2,000 without a committee decision, that's where you're starting to get into that area, which is problematic. I suggest that the strata manager should look at their agreement, work out what they can do, and anything above, the strata committee just needs to call, like you say, call meetings and take decisions on that. There's requirements for giving notice on the notice board, or if it's a large scheme, all the owners and so forth. So you just need to make sure that those are adhered to as well.
Excellent, thank you.
But I think you're on the right track, absolutely. And the key is, because you're not in the committee, would be to raise it as something that you want to see improved, but so as not to paint yourself as, you know, the fly in the ointment, and what the building's trying to do. Yeah, that's what
okay.
I'm
excellent. Yeah. Now we've sort of been going on for about 40 minutes now, and I know we could chat all day, Rod, but I think maybe we've got a few more questions in there. We'll certainly get back to people that have put questions in. Some of them are a little bit complicated to discuss here today in the Q&A, but one of the things we spoke about before we started the meeting that you thought was a really important thing to mention was what's happening with pets in New South Wales with the no pet bylaw. So would you like to give us a quick rundown on what's happening there?
Yeah, so I strongly recommend it, at the risk of giving you a shameless plug, Nikki, reading the article from Adrian Mueller dated the 18th of June on your website. It gives a really good update on that. So I'm not going to go into all the nitty gritties on that article other than the high level. So the NCAT at the moment seems to be flip-flopping between whether or not no pet bylaws are unreasonable, harsh, and unconscionable. So the NCAT said they are. The NCAT Court of Appeal said they're not. So when the long and short is where we go off the NCAT Court of Appeal at this present time. However, what I would suggest owners that are thinking about introducing no pets bylaws into their scheme is you really should have a think about guide and assistance animals and if you should exclude them. The reason I say that is that assistance animals, when I started Strata 17 years ago, I'd never heard of an assistance animal, but it's now becoming more, especially over the last 5 years, more prevalent in Strata. So you need to have a think about how you deal with assistance animals, and after speaking to a lawyer about what's reasonable for you to do. So I really would encourage you, if you're thinking about going that way, by having a carve out to consider and allow guide and assistance animals within your strata scheme. Yeah, just because I think it's the right thing to do, and you don't want to be discriminatory against people who have impairments within your strata scheme. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you don't have a pets bylaw, I strongly suggest you consider having a think as a committee about what conditions would you allow pets within your building, because the general bylaw is extremely vague. It says an owner's corporation can't unreasonably withhold consent for a pet. I'm going to give you two examples, which will hopefully give you a chuckle, but also a real example. So the first is in one of my strata schemes, we have in the city, high rise, we have a bee enclosure. Now, I haven't seen the bee enclosure. Someone just brought it in, and it's real. So we have other things in the building that we're dealing with at the moment, and the committee's not pursuing that. But that's the sort of thing that you can see occasionally in strata schemes. We've had applications for snakes. So I don't know about you, but living next door to a 7-foot carpet python is not my idea of fun. So you might want to have a think about speaking to a lawyer around what are you going to allow. And normally I've got a really good bylaw in one of my buildings which says you can have 2 dogs or 2 cats or a combination of 1 dog, 1 cat. You're allowed to have fish in a small enclosure, and that's it. That's the approved list of pets. But they need to carry them across common property. They need to fix any common property that may have, been impacted by the use of the pet. And there's a list of conditions that they can and can't do, and can't create nuisance. The Owners Corporation reserves the right to remove or insist that you remove your pet if they're continually breaching noise and so forth. So you really want to be quite tight around that. And I suggest that strata schemes would have a think about, what are the conditions for pet owners, because that's something that's quite vague in the current bylaws, which are the general bylaws.
And it is a huge concern. We have so many questions and so much traffic coming in for people looking for information about pets. So just going back to the bee one that you mentioned, Rod, so I imagine that is the bee enclosure on common property as well. So a lot of owners actually brought an enclosure in. No? Oh, is it really?
But it's just not approved.
Really?
So they've got conditions around what sort of pets are allowed and not, but it's not approved. So I imagine a lot of owners corporations would think that having a massive bee enclosure in a city apartment building may be not within keeping of the strata scheme, and not within the what they want to have within their strata. So yeah.
Okay. And then with, can I just ask, with the assistance animals, we actually had a question come in the other day. Can an assistant animal also be a cat, not just a dog?
Yes. So it can. Post-traumatic stress disorder is animals are quite helpful for that. And I imagine just the action of patting a cat, you need a doctor's report on that and the animal and so forth. So it'd be a bit of a different thing. But I know equine therapy, not that you'd have a horse in a strata scheme, but equine therapy is proven to assist with trauma. So animals I'm not an expert in it, but I know a bit through my personal life, my kids and so forth. But assistance animals, it's quite a broad category and there's a lot to it. So I'm not an expert on it, but I would imagine that a cat with a doctor's certificate would be fine.
Okay, great, thank you. And also just going back on approval, I know we've had questions come in with regards to approval, and does the approval go with the apartment? So if someone else moves into the apartment, they're automatically approved to have 2 dogs if the previous person had 2 dogs? And then another approval question has been around, if I had approval for a dog and the dog passes away and I get another dog, do I have to get approval for the new dog, or have I already got approval for a dog?
Yeah, normally it's with the animal.
Okay.
And for the individual applicant, but the conditions around keeping pets should be uniform. It should be the same. The chairperson or the treasurer shouldn't get, I can have 5 dogs and everyone else can, all you little people can only have 1. Like it's rules. It's around governance of rules for everyone, so that so that's really clear. You know what the criteria is. You know what you need to do if things start going awry.
Okay, excellent. And we've just got, probably to finish off, we've got one question that's coming. It's quite a broad question, but I'll throw it to you anyway. And it's something that we see lots and lots of questions and interest on. How do you stop residents from parking in visitors' parking spots?
Well, people parking and pets, hey, Nikki?
That's it.
Yeah, it's I'm assuming, so I've got a build, you need to have a record keeping system to work out who's parking and be able to track vehicles to owners. If you've got a building manager, it's easier. It is difficult. The buildings that I manage without a building manager normally have a member on the committee that's a covert parking operative that provides us with information so that we can target the offenders and get the result. You'll again, we come back to the high distinction, 85%. In those buildings, normally we see massive improvements, but it's something that needs to be continually managed, like storing items in car spaces, like what Pete was saying, people leaving their shoes and their floor mats and prams. It's something that you need to stay on top of as a building. So what I'd suggest you do, what we did at one of our buildings, we have a massive visitors space, visitors parking area with about 20 spaces. One of the committee members wrote down all the cars and regos over a week period. When they went for their walk in the morning. We then had good data. We wrote to all the owners and the agents, and we said, just a reminder, visitor parking on common property is expressly prohibited for residents. It's for visitors only. The following cars have been noted and reported. If you are one of them, please refrain. And then agents, please pass this on to your tenants. So by doing that over a period of time, you know, great news. We had 9 offenders. We're now down to 3. These are the 3 people. This is the final warning before we take you to fair trading, and then you can choose to take them or not. But we did whittle them down to, say, 15 down to 2. So we did have massive improvements on that. So that's something, but it's something you need someone from the committee to drive and be responsible for. I'd probably suggest, if it's a major problem and you've got a building around 50 or 60 apartments, that probably should be someone's key role on the committee to work with the strata manager to keep it, if it's a problem for you as a committee.
Okay, and I'd imagine it comes down to consistency as well. So you'd have to consistently be maintaining the same standards, which it would come back to, like you were saying, shoes in hallways and I guess washing on balconies and all of that kind of thing as well.
And items in the back of common property car spaces is another one. You need to be on top of that. And the best way is having someone in your strata committee in partnership with the strata manager.
Okay, excellent. Well, honestly, Rod, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. You've filled the session with so much of your knowledge and experience, and it's been a pleasure and lovely to see you again too.
Thank you, Nikki. Much appreciated.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for watching, everybody. We'll be doing these sessions. We hope to be doing them on a fortnightly basis, and we'll pick a new topic and a new sort of area of Australia to cover over the fortnightly sessions. But Rod, we'd love to have you back sometime in the future, and we'll tackle the rest of the questions that we didn't get to today.
Thanks, Nikki. My pleasure.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.